Hey guys, tonight we're drifting back, way back, to the candlelit chaos of ancient Rome. So go ahead, dim the lights, grab a blanket, and settle in. Because tonight, you're not just any Roman citizen. You're not even a senator's bored wife or a random plebeian trying not to die of dysentery. Nope, tonight you're his concubine, the personal plaything of Emperor Nero. Congratulations, or condolences. Let's start with the vibe. It's the year 62 CE, and Rome smells like olive oil, ambition, and bad decisions. The empire is huge, shiny, and built on 1,000 years of questionable moral choices. Nero, the man at the center of it all, has decided that ruling the world isn't enough. He wants art, music, love, well, his idea of love, and you, apparently, are part of that. When you wake up in Nero's palace, the first thing you notice is that it's a little too quiet. There's a reason for that. When you serve the most unstable emperor in Roman history, silence isn't peace, it's survival. Every sound could be the start of another imperial tantrum. Every whisper could be a death sentence. Your day starts before dawn. Servants glide through the corridors like ghosts, lighting oil lamps and spraying perfume to mask the ever-present stench of politics. You're escorted to the baths because, of course, cleanliness is next to godliness, unless you're Nero, who thinks he is godliness. While you soak in the marble tub, you think about how you got here. Maybe you were born to a noble family that fell on hard times. Maybe your father traded you for favor at court. Maybe he caught your eye during one of his endless banquets. He probably liked the way you laughed, or didn't laugh, at his terrible poetry, because Nero fancies himself an artist. He sings, he acts, he writes tragic plays, and everyone agrees he's wonderful, mostly because they like keeping their heads attached. When he first noticed you, he probably said something like, "You have the grace of Venus," while holding a goblet of watered wine and wearing a toga that cost more than a small villa. You smiled, of course. What else were you supposed to do? Say no? There's no polite way to reject a living god who once set half his city on fire just to see how it looked at night. By mid-morning, you're dressed in gauzy silk imported from the East, one of the few perks of imperial concubinage. You wear gold bracelets shaped like serpents, a sign of favor, and your hair is curled into ringlets by a slave who hasn't slept since Caligula was alive. Then comes the waiting. The emperor doesn't wake up early. Nero's mornings are spent sleeping off wine, composing songs about his own greatness, or occasionally sentencing someone to death because the soup was cold. You sit in one of the palace gardens, surrounded by marble statues and the faint smell of roses. Sometimes you talk to the other concubines. Carefully, politely, like prisoners comparing notes. There's Lucilla, who swears she once saw Nero cry during a performance of his own play. There's Claudia, who insists she's going to write a book about all this someday if writing weren't considered a man's profession. And there's you, trying to pretend you're not terrified every second of the day. When Nero finally appears, it's usually around noon. He's wearing a robe dyed imperial purple, the most expensive color on earth, because of course it is, and carrying a lyre. That's your cue to smile, nod, and look impressed, even though you know what's coming next. He plays. And he sings. Badly. He sings about gods and heroes and how misunderstood he is. It's all very emotional, very tragic, very nobody gets me. And you, along with everyone else in the room, must look utterly enthralled. If you don't, you might end up exiled, or worse, forced to listen to an encore. But you've learned to survive. You clap softly, you smile gently, you even let your eyes water a little, just enough to look moved. Nero beams. You've done well. Afternoons are unpredictable. Sometimes Nero drags everyone to the arena to watch gladiators fight. Other days he throws feasts that last till dawn. You sit beside him, your job equal parts ornament and audience. He talks about philosophy, pretends to debate ethics, and makes jokes about senators. Nobody laughs too hard. You never want to outshine the emperor. At night, the palace grows louder. Music, laughter, the clink of goblets, it's all just background noise to the real entertainment. Nero himself. He might recite poetry, reenact Greek myths, or decide that now is the perfect time to race chariots in the palace courtyard. You watch, you cheer, you exist for his amusement. And then, when the torches burn low, Nero's eyes find you. That's when you remember what you really are. Not a guest, not a partner, but a possession. Being a concubine isn't the nightmare people imagine. It's worse. It's gilded servitude. You sleep on silk, eat off gold, and live on eggshells. Every day could bring new jewels or new punishment. If Nero loves you, you're safe. For now. But he's loved many before you, and love, in his world, often ends with poison. Still, you survive. You learn to navigate his moods. You learn when to speak, when to laugh, when to disappear. You learn that the only thing more dangerous than being unnoticed in Nero's court is being noticed too much.
You tell yourself it's temporary. You tell yourself you'll find a way out. You tell yourself stories about freedom, about peace, about a Rome that doesn't revolve around one man's madness. But tonight, under the flickering candlelight, you belong to Nero, and he's decided to perform again. Now, let's drift back to the heart of Rome's madness, where marble halls echo with laughter, music, and the faint sound of someone being discreetly executed behind a curtain. The day wears on. The palace glows gold in the late afternoon sun, and you, lucky you, are preparing for another imperial feast. You don't eat much at these events. It's less dinner and more a 7-hour performance where everyone pretends to enjoy themselves while wondering who won't make it home. The servants dress you again, this time in deep crimson silk embroidered with gold thread. You're perfumed, painted, and perfected, because Nero doesn't do subtle. When the emperor throws a dinner, it's not about food. It's about spectacle. Picture it. Long marble tables covered in silver platters, peacocks roasted whole, flamingo tongues, oysters from the farthest corners of the empire. The scent of incense fills the air until it's hard to breathe, and every surface seems to glimmer. Musicians pluck harps softly in the corner, hoping their performance pleases him enough to stay employed. Nero enters fashionably late, as always. He's draped in gold and ego. The room freezes. Conversations stop mid-laugh. Someone probably chokes on a grape. He takes his seat at the head of the table, flashes a smile that could mean welcome or prepare to die, and gestures for the feast to begin. You sit close enough to be noticed, but not close enough to become a target. That's the sweet spot. From here you can watch him, how he leans forward when he's pleased, how his knuckles whiten when someone else dares to talk longer than he does. He laughs loudly at his own jokes. Everyone else laughs too, just a beat too late. You learn quickly. In Nero's Rome, timing is everything. And then comes the performance. Because of course there's a performance. Nero can't eat without reminding everyone that he's an artist. He stands, lifts his wine, and announces that tonight he will honor the gods by performing his own tragic composition again. The crowd murmurs reverently. You murmur too, because that's what survival sounds like. He sings about lost love, fate, and divine suffering. His voice cracks a little, but no one dares notice. His passion is overwhelming. You've heard better music from drunk soldiers in the street, but you nod like it's divine inspiration. Halfway through, he glances at you. For a heartbeat, you think, maybe this time he'll forget your furniture. Maybe he'll see a person. But then he turns back to his audience, basking in the glow of his own spotlight. When he finishes, the applause thunders. Senators pound their cups against the table until their hands sting. Someone faints, from emotion, supposedly, though you suspect from boredom. Nero smiles, basking. You exhale. Crisis avoided. Later, the feast dissolves into chaos. Drunken nobles argue over politics they don't understand. Someone sets fire to a centerpiece, which everyone pretends is symbolic art. Nero flirts openly with a new dancer, and you learn once again how temporary favor really is. But there's no jealousy here, not the kind that shows. You know better than that. In the imperial court, jealousy is suicide. You just smile, sip watered wine, and let your mind drift. You think of the city beyond these walls, the noise, the smells, the humanity. You wonder what it must be like to walk down a street without guards or whispers. You wonder if you'd even remember how. Then, as if reading your thoughts, Nero calls your name. The room goes still again. He beckons you forward with a lazy hand, that same half-smile on his lips. Your pulse quickens, but your face stays calm. Always calm. You rise, glide across the mosaic floor, bow slightly. He praises you, your beauty, your grace, your ability to listen without speaking. High praise, apparently. Then he asks you to pour his wine. It's an honor, one that no one refuses. Your hands are steady as you fill his goblet. You hand it to him, bow again, and return to your place. The moment passes. The crowd exhales collectively. That's life at Nero's table. One small misstep away from oblivion, dressed in gold and drenched in perfume. When the feast finally ends, the palace grows quiet again. The torches gutter low, their smoke curling like ghosts above the marble. You slip away to your chamber, exhausted but alert. Sleep doesn't come easy in Nero's Rome.
You think about the others, the concubines who came before you. Some disappeared quietly, some married well, some didn't. You know the story of Poppaea Sabina, Nero's wife, the one he supposedly loved until he didn't, the one whose beauty became her downfall. The whispers say he struck her in a fit of rage, and that was that. But don't worry, he made her a goddess afterward. That's Rome's version of an apology. You wonder what kind of goddess you'd be. Maybe one of patience, maybe survival. Outside, the city hums. Somewhere in the distance, someone's singing badly in Latin. You close your eyes, and for a moment, you almost laugh. Because in a world ruled by a man who thinks he's divine, humor might be the only real form of rebellion left. You breathe, slow and quiet as the palace settles into uneasy sleep. Let's slip back into the candlelit labyrinth that is Nero's palace, a place where gossip travels faster than chariots, and survival depends on how convincingly you can pretend to adore a man who might execute you for blinking too loudly. By now, you've learned that being Nero's concubine isn't about romance. It's about reading the room, and by room, I mean the emperor. His moods shift faster than the Tiber's current. One minute, he's a generous god showering you with pearls. The next, he's sulking because someone dared to breathe during his latest tragic monologue. You've seen it before. The musician who played one note too sharp? Gone. The servant who sneezed during dinner? Gone. The noblewoman who laughed too late at his joke? Gone, and possibly immortalized as example number 73 in the emperor's growing list of public lessons. Mornings are quiet. Too quiet. That's how you know something's wrong. Nero likes noise. Applause, music, affirmation. When the palace falls silent, it's because he's thinking. And Nero thinking usually means someone's about to regret existing. You hear whispers down the hall, rumors that a senator insulted him, that his mother's ghost is haunting his dreams again, that someone said his latest poem wasn't divine. It wasn't, by the way. It was about a dolphin. The whispers reach you, of course. You always hear them, even when you pretend not to. You've mastered the art of listening without reacting. In this palace, expressions are dangerous. A single raised eyebrow could look like rebellion. Your chambermaids know this too. They move around you like shadows, avoiding eye contact. One of them, a timid girl from Crete, once told you in a whisper, "The emperor dreams in blood." You told her never to say that again, not because she was wrong, but because you liked her and wanted her to live another week. Speaking of haunting, let's talk about Poppaea. Even dead, she's still the most powerful woman in Nero's life. You've seen her portrait. Flawless skin, golden hair, eyes painted to follow you from the wall. She died years ago, but the emperor still talks to her sometimes, usually after too much wine. He says things like, "She understands me," or "She would have loved this song." Everyone nods sullenly, pretending not to remember that he's the one who killed her. You once asked an older servant if the story was true. The man looked both ways and whispered, "He kicked her in the stomach. She was pregnant." Then he crossed himself and hurried away. Now, every time Nero drinks too much, you wonder, is tonight the night Poppaea's ghost comes back for revenge? Or worse, does he see you as her replacement? Because here's the thing about Nero. His affection is obsessive. It burns bright and fast, then turns to ash. The more he loves, the more dangerous it gets. You'd think an emperor with absolute power wouldn't need reassurance every 5 minutes. But Nero, he's practically allergic to indifference. After lunch, if you can call a 6-course banquet lunch, he gathers everyone in the courtyard. You, the concubines, senators, guards, everyone important enough to be executed publicly. He paces slowly, his purple robes trailing like spilled ink. He's in a mood, that much is clear. He begins to talk about loyalty, about betrayal, about how certain people in Rome have forgotten who made them powerful. His eyes scan the crowd, sharp and feverish. You hold your breath. Then he smiles. "But not you, my darlings. You are loyal." And just like that, everyone relaxes. Except you. You've seen this play before. The calm before the inevitable. That night, 2 senators are arrested. Their families vanish, and the palace once again pretends nothing happened.
The next evening, Nero visits you. You feel it before he enters, the shift in the air, the way servants scatter like startled birds. He's sober tonight. Worse, he's thoughtful. He talks about music, about destiny, about the fickleness of love. You listen quietly, because your survival depends on it. Every nod, every breath is calculated. Then he says something that freezes your blood. "Do you think Poppaea would have loved me more if she'd lived?" You pause. The wrong answer could end you. You choose your words carefully. "She loved you as much as anyone could love a god, my lord." He studies your face for a long, silent moment. Then finally, he smiles. "Yes, I suppose she did." He kisses your forehead and leaves. You don't exhale until the echo of his sandals fades down the hall. A week later, Nero sends you a gift, a golden mirror framed with rubies. The note says, "So you may reflect my glory when I am gone." It's beautiful and terrifying, because everything from Nero has two meanings, one for the court, one for the grave. You hang it on your wall anyway, not because you like it, but because refusing a gift from the emperor is the fastest way to make the gone part come true. Every time you look into it, you see yourself, young, tired, trapped in a world gilded by cruelty. You touch the glass, half expecting to see Poppeia's reflection staring back. Nero's masterpiece, his Domus Aurea, the Golden House, is finally complete. It's an obscene monument to ego. Marble halls plated with gold leaf, walls painted with scenes of himself as Apollo, ceilings that sprinkle rose petals on guests. You're expected to attend the grand unveiling. The crowd gasps in awe as Nero gestures around, beaming. "Now at last," he declares, "I can live like a human being." You resist the urge to laugh. Later, as the torches burn low, you wander the corridors of his shining palace. Every surface gleams, but there's no warmth. The gold reflects everything except humanity. You think about the city outside, still half in ruins from the fire he probably started, the people rebuilding their homes, their lives. And here you are, a gilded ornament in the emperor's personal temple to himself. You wonder what they'd think if they saw you now, the girl who traded freedom for survival, comfort for safety, truth for silence. And then you realize that's everyone in Nero's Rome. By now, Rome has learned to read Nero's moods the way sailors read storms. His laughter doesn't mean joy, it's just thunder before the lightning. You, meanwhile, have become an expert in silence. Every word in this palace is a gamble. The empire feels it too. The provinces whisper, soldiers grumble. Even the Senate, that pit of polite vipers, has started exchanging nervous glances when his name is spoken. But Nero, he doesn't see it. He only sees his stage. He spends his days performing, still obsessed with his image. He enters the theater dressed as Apollo, the god of music and light, demanding applause before he's even sung a note. And everyone claps, of course, because the alternative is execution for bad taste. Sometimes he asks you afterwards, "Did they love me?" And you say softly, "They adored you." You've said it 100 times. You'll say it 100 more. The memory of Rome's great fire still lingers like smoke. Officially, it wasn't his fault. Unofficially, everyone knows he probably did it. Maybe not with his own hands, but with his own curiosity. He wanted a clean slate, a chance to rebuild the city in his image. A city worthy of Nero, he called it, which in hindsight sounds less like urban planning and more like a cry for help. You remember that night. You could see the glow from the palace balcony, flames leaping skyward, sparks floating like fireflies. The people screamed, the sky turned red, and Nero, he watched, fascinated, humming softly as if the world was applauding him. Later, he blamed the Christians, because of course, someone had to pay. The next day you watched the arrests begin. Men dragged through the streets, women crying, fires replaced by crucifixions. You learned something important then. When power loses control, it always points downward. Your life at court becomes a pattern: praise, paranoia, and punishment.
Nero grows restless. His attention drifts from you to new faces, a dancer from Greece, a boy singer from Alexandria. You feel relief, then guilt for feeling it. You want his gaze elsewhere, but every time it moves, someone disappears. You've seen the cycle enough to know what comes next: suspicion. He starts asking questions. Why are you quiet tonight? Who did you speak to in the garden? Do you still think of me when I'm gone? You answer perfectly, always. You smile just enough. You let him believe his fantasies, because when a man believes he's loved, he's slower to destroy. But you can feel the noose tightening around everyone else. Advisors vanish overnight. Courtiers whisper that the Praetorian Guard is restless. Even the marble feels colder these days. There's a strange emptiness in Nero now. He still sings, still plays, still commands, but his laughter doesn't reach his eyes. You once found him alone in the garden at dawn, staring into a pond. The reflection looking back at him wasn't a god, but a man, aging, bloated, hollow. He didn't notice you approach. He just whispered, "They don't love me anymore." You wanted to say something comforting. Instead, you said nothing, because what could you say? The truth? That they never did, not really? That they clapped because they were terrified? He throws a stone into the water, shattering his reflection. If Rome doesn't love me, Rome doesn't deserve me. You leave before he remembers you were there. Rumors spread like wildfire again. Not the kind that burns buildings, but the kind that burns legacies. The army has turned. The Senate has turned. Even the guards have started looking away when Nero passes. You can feel it, the air itself shifting. He holds one last feast. You attend, of course. Everyone does. The room is filled with laughter that sounds like mourning. Nero drinks too much. He recites poetry. He promises vengeance, then promises mercy, then forgets what he promised at all. When the musicians pack up and the torches burn low, he's left alone, surrounded by gold, drowning in silence. The next morning, the palace is chaos. Word spread fast. The Senate has declared him a public enemy. The emperor who thought himself a god is now an outlaw in his own empire. You hide in your chamber as soldiers rush past, their sandals slapping against marble. You hear shouting, then galloping, then nothing. Nero flees. Some say he rides through the night. Some say he hides in a friend's villa. You'll never know. What you do know is that the palace feels lighter without him, and emptier. The fear remains, echoing through its halls, but the man himself is gone. A few days later, word arrives. Nero is dead. Suicide, they say, though no one believes it was entirely his choice. Rome moves on. It always does. Years later, you'll still dream of that golden house. The laughter, the music, the smell of wine and wax. You'll remember the way Nero's eyes flickered like candlelight, brilliant, unpredictable, doomed. You'll walk through street markets and hear people curse his name, spit at his statues, and call him a monster. But sometimes you'll see a street performer playing the lyre, and you'll feel something almost like sorrow. Because you knew him, not as an emperor or a god, but a man. A lonely, broken man who built a palace of gold to hide from his own reflection. And you? You survived him. Not by fighting, not by running, but by learning the quietest art of all, how to live unseen. So, the curtain's finally closed. Nero's gone, his marble empire already collecting dust. And you're still breathing. Congratulations. Statistically speaking, that's impressive. Rome wakes up like a city after a bad dream. The smoke's cleared, the gold is chipped, and the people have a new hobby, pretending they never liked him anyway. The same senators who once kissed his feet now call him the tyrant. The same poets who praised him as divine now write tragic verses about mad emperors. And you, one of the few who actually knew him, can't decide whether to laugh or cry. Nero's statues are being torn down, his name chiseled off marble, replaced with someone else's.
Coins with his face are melted into anonymity. History, you realize, isn't written by the survivors. It's rewritten by the successors. The new emperor, Galba, arrives in Rome like a ghostbuster with a broom. He promises restoration of order, which sounds noble, but really means erase every trace of the guy before me.
In public, you join the crowds cheering his name. In private, you can't help noticing that Galba looks like every old senator Nero hated. Pale, bitter, self-righteous. You can already tell he's going to overcorrect everything. And he does. Gone are the banquets, the music, the chaos. The palace turns quiet again. Too quiet. Galba has no use for concubines. He has moral standards, the kind that make everyone else miserable. You'd think freedom would feel different. Lighter, maybe. But it doesn't. The palace doors are open, but the world outside is heavier than you remember. You rent a small house near the Esquiline Hill, a place where no one knows your name. The air smells like bread, not incense. The people laugh without glancing over their shoulders. You tell them you were once a servant in the emperor's house. That's not a lie. It's just edited. At night, you can't sleep. You still hear the sound of his voice in the back of your mind, that lazy, drawn-out drawl he used when he wanted to be adored. You hear the clapping, the laughter, the music, and then the silence. You wonder if he ever regretted anything. Probably not. Regret requires empathy, and Nero's soul was built from applause, not reflection. A few years pass. Rome changes emperors like sandals. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, each one lasts just long enough to prove Nero wasn't the only disaster. By the time Vespasian takes power, everyone's too tired to care. The empire is held together by duct tape, wine, and denial. You hear rumors. Someone's writing a biography of Nero. A senator named Tacitus, maybe? Another guy, Suetonius. They call him corrupt, mad, a disgrace. And they're not wrong. But as you read the words, you feel something strange. Because behind their righteous disgust, you see what they don't. The lonely boy behind the tyrant. The singer who wanted to be loved. The artist trapped inside a crown that crushed everyone, including him. You close the scroll and whisper, "He wasn't a god. He was just human." And for the first time in years, you mean it without fear. Rome forgets quickly, but memory lingers like perfume. You keep one thing from the palace, that golden mirror Nero gave you. It hangs in your home, faintly tarnished now. Sometimes you catch your reflection and almost expect to see him standing behind you. You don't, but you still talk to him sometimes, quietly. Not in prayer, not in longing, just acknowledgement. Because the past doesn't disappear when the empire says so. It lives inside those who remember. You light a candle and sit by the window. The night hums with crickets. Somewhere down the street, a poet recites verses about the fall of tyrants. The audience applauds. And you? You smile. Because you've learned something Nero never did. That peace isn't found in power or applause. It's found in the silence afterward. Years later, when your hair is silver and the city feels smaller, you visit the ruins of the Golden House. It's half buried now, its ceiling collapsed, its gold stripped away. Tourists wander through,
whispering about the mad emperor, as if he were a myth. You stand there, under the faint echo of his laughter, and think, this was once the center of the world, and now it's dust. Maybe that's what all history is. Dust rearranged into stories. You turn to leave, pulling your shawl tighter. The guide calls out, "Did you know Nero once sang right here while Rome burned?" You nod softly. "Yes," I say, "I remember." And as you walk away, the sun dips low over the city, casting the ruins in gold, the same color he loved, the same color of the fire that consumed him. History doesn't end. It just exhales. After all the noise, the wars, the banquets, the flames, comes the silence. And that's where the real story lives. Nero's empire collapsed, sure. The statues crumbled, the marble cracked, and the Senate went back to pretending it mattered. But beneath all that, something older remained. The rhythm of life. The quiet heartbeat of people who endured, the servants, the poets, the concubines, the forgotten. You can almost hear it now, the slow, sleepy hum of Rome breathing under the stars. Picture it, the candle burning low beside an open book, the wax melting into tiny rivers, the words on the page fading into the dark. That's history, really. Fire and paper, memory and ash. We tell these stories not to glorify them, but to understand the weight of what humans do when they think they're gods. And maybe, just maybe, to remind ourselves that power always fades, but stories, they linger.
The Golden House doesn't die with Nero. Not really. Stone has a memory. And Rome, oh, Rome loves to forget loudly, but remember quietly. So even though Vespasian, the new emperor, orders the filling in of Nero's grand fountains and builds the Colosseum right over his lake, because nothing says new regime like an arena full of lions, the palace's bones remain underneath. You live long enough to see construction start. The noise is endless. Hammer on marble, hammer on memory. Sometimes when you walk past the site, you think you can still hear faint music. Nero's voice drifting through the rubble, whispering half a verse of poetry, then fading beneath the roar of the crowds. You've made peace with anonymity. No jewels, no guards, no fear of waking up on the wrong side of the emperor's mood. You sell herbs now. Lavender, sage, sometimes rare oils if you can afford them. People call you the perfume widow. They don't ask why your house always smells faintly of smoke and old incense. Every now and then, an old courtier passes through your stall. They recognize you, or pretend not to. You both smile that small Roman smile, the one that means, we survived the play, didn't we? But peace, as Rome defines it, never lasts. Rumors begin. Nero isn't dead. Some say he escaped to the east, that he sings for Greek kings who still adore him. Others swear they've seen him walking along the Appian Way at dusk, humming softly, golden lyre slung across his back. It's nonsense, of course. Probably. Still, the whispers get louder. Coins appear with his face again. Crude, counterfeit, but real enough to make the Senate sweat. A few pretenders rise up, calling themselves Nero Reborn, and because people are people, they follow. You watch from your window as soldiers march past again. You sigh, pour yourself another cup of watered wine, and whisper, I told you he'd never shut up. One night, a messenger comes. He's trembling,
says he's been ordered to deliver a sealed scroll. No sender's name, no mark. You open it, expecting tax notices, maybe gossip. Instead, there's a single line. You once told me I was loved. I believed you. Thank you. There's no signature. No need. The handwriting is shaky, but familiar. Broad, looping strokes, ink smudged where a thumb lingered too long. You sit there for a long time, staring at it by candlelight, until the wax burns down and the words fade into shadow. Years pass like slow river water. Rome forgets again. Nero becomes a story, then a warning, then a ghost told to scare ambitious boys. You, the concubine who lived through emperors, become a story too. The neighbors think you're some kind of oracle. They come asking for dreams, for lucky omens, for love charms. You smile and tell them, everything ends. Love, power, fear. The only thing that stays is memory. Guard that, and you'll sleep fine. They always leave a coin on your table. You always light a candle after they're gone. Not for Nero, not anymore. For yourself. And for the strange, endless city that never stops dreaming, even when it should.
The years keep turning, slow and stubborn, like an old millstone grinding time into dust. Rome is changing, again, but somehow it's always the same. New emperors wear old crowns, old crimes get new excuses, and the city keeps pretending that order has returned. You've learned to spot the pattern now. You've lived through enough new eras to know that every restoration starts with a speech about peace and ends with another execution list. Still, life hums on. The baker still opens at dawn, the forum still buzzes with gossip and bribes. And at night, when the city goes quiet, you can almost feel Rome sigh, like an aging giant who just wants to lie down. Vespasian, the emperor who buried Nero's legacy under the Colosseum, isn't a monster. He's a soldier, practical, humorless, allergic to poetry. He doesn't kill for art, only for efficiency. You almost miss Nero's chaos. Almost. His sons, though, well, history doesn't do calm for long. Titus comes first, handsome, kind, the good son. He finishes his father's Colosseum, stages games that last 100 days, and wins hearts by crying in public when Mount Vesuvius buries Pompeii. He seems too perfect, which, in Rome, is a medical condition. And sure enough, he dies early. Fever, poison, divine punishment, take your pick. Rome doesn't care how you die, as long as it's dramatic. Then comes Domitian, the younger brother, the shadow nobody expected. He's the kind of man who stares too long at reflections and measures loyalty in whispers. He starts his rule with promises and ends it with paranoia. You've seen this play before. The Senate calls him Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. You can almost hear Nero chuckle in the afterlife. Finally, someone gets it. You're older now, old enough to know better, not old enough to stop remembering. Domitian fascinates you, not because he's kind, he isn't, but because he's familiar. The same hunger for control, the same theatrical cruelty. He builds temples to himself and hunts faitors who dare dream privately. You watch from the edges, unseen. You've made a life out of being a shadow, the one talent Rome actually rewards. You hear that Domitian's wife keeps a dagger under her pillow. Smart woman. Every time his statues rise, you think of Nero's, how quickly they fell. The marble might change faces, but it's the same fear underneath. And so, when the rumors come that the empress has turned against him, that the Praetorians are sharpening their blades, you don't flinch. When the news arrived that Domitian is dead, stabbed in his own Rome, you simply nod and light another candle.
You've lived long enough to know that emperors die exactly the way they ruled, surrounded by silence. After Domitian's fall, Rome does what it always does: sighs, reforms, and renames the problem.
Now they call it the Age of the Good Emperors. Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, men of balance and beard oil, supposedly wise and gentle. Hadrian builds walls at the edge of the world. Trajan expands the empire until it bursts at the seams. Marcus Aurelius writes sad little diaries about virtue while his armies slaughter half of Germania. The Senate calls it peace. You call it denial. From your small home, you can see the pattern widening, a loop of power and regret. Every emperor tries to outshine the ghost of the last, and every time they fail, Nero's laughter grows a little louder in your dreams. Once a young scholar visits you. He's studying Nero's reign and wants eyewitness testimony. You laugh softly. It's been 60 years. Your voice has changed, your memory has softened. But when he presses, you agree. You tell him what the historians won't, that Nero wasn't just mad, he was fragile, lonely, a man who mistook applause for affection. The scholar writes everything down, eyes wide like he's found treasure. When he leaves, he thanks you and promises your story will preserve the truth. You smile. You don't tell him that truth doesn't survive in Rome, only versions. Still, it's something. A thread in the tapestry, a soft hum under the thunder of power. By the time Hadrian dies, you're older than most of Rome's walls. The world feels slower, softer, like an echo fading across marble. You walk the streets at dusk, your steps small and steady. You pass the Colosseum, still full of shouting and spectacle, built over Nero's dream. You pass temples that used to be houses, and ruins that used to be gods. And for the first time, you realize something. Rome isn't eternal. It's just very good at pretending to be. The empire will fall, not today, not tomorrow, but eventually. Maybe not to swords or fire, but to exhaustion. Because even empires get tired. The empire is quieter now, like an old man talking to himself in an empty courtyard. The streets still bustle, yes, but the grandeur feels rehearsed, like everyone's pretending not to notice the cracks in the marble. The temples are fading, their altars cold, their gods neglected. Jupiter's priests still march in the festivals, but their chants sound tired, like echoes of a faith no one really feels anymore. The empire has turned gray, not dead, but weary, stretched too thin across too many miles, too many tongues, too many emperors who come and go faster than the seasons. You've lived through the age of marble, and now you're living through the age of dust. You hear of new things, strange, quiet gatherings in the catacombs. People whisper about a crucified God, one who preached peace and poverty and forgiveness. The story feels absurd in Rome, a city built on conquest and taxes, and yet you see them, these followers of the new faith, carrying their belief like a candle in a storm. They remind you of Nero in a way, the same dangerous conviction that the world can be rewritten, that the old ways aren't enough. You wonder if he'd hated them or admired them. Probably both. You're too old to care about gods. You've seen too many of them fall. The only faith you've ever trusted is survival. But sometimes, late at night, when you hear those new songs drifting through the streets, soft and trembling, you feel something stir. It isn't belief exactly. It's memory of all the times you wished someone, anyone, had offered forgiveness instead of fire. The city has changed. The Senate still meets, but no one listens. The emperor's name changes every few years. Commodus, Severus, Caracalla, all the same hunger in different armor. They build, they kill, they proclaim peace.
then start again. And yet, somehow, Rome keeps standing, held together by habit and pride.
You see young men in the Forum quoting philosophers who never believed a word of what they wrote. You see mothers rocking their children to sleep, telling them stories about heroes who no longer matter. Life continues. It always does. You live long enough to see the soldiers take what used to belong to senators. You see the emperors turn into generals, and the generals turn into ghosts. You watch as the empire's borders shrink, the legions thinning like an old man's hair. Trade slows, gold disappears, bread lines grow. The once terrifying Roman eagle looks tired, its wings drooping. You think of Nero's golden palace, long buried beneath the Colosseum, and realize that maybe he built it for the right reason after all. Not as a monument, but as a warning. And through it all, you stay where you are, quiet, watching. You're a ghost in your own lifetime, a relic of a vanished world. Sometimes the local children call you grandmother of the old gods. You let them. It's easier than explaining. You lived long enough to see your past turn into myth and your memories turn into stories no one believes. But some nights, when the wind shifts, you swear you can still smell the faint sweetness of burning oil, that mix of candle wax and smoke that once filled Nero's palace. You can almost hear his voice again, soft and far away, singing to an audience that's long since vanished. And you smile, just a little, because history never really buries its dead. It just changes their names. The world outside your window no longer belongs to emperors. It belongs to bishops and generals, prophets and pretenders. But deep down, it's the same story. Power, fear, and the strange, endless hope that someone will remember you kindly. You whisper to the night, "Let them forget me. Let them sleep." And as the city dreams, its domes fading under the moonlight, its statues eroded by time, you finally close your eyes. Not in fear this time, not in exile, just rest. Because you've seen the rise and fall of gods and men, and you know now, it all ends in silence. The centuries turn like slow pages, and Rome, that tired old giant, keeps pretending she's still young. But the light has changed. The marble gleam is gone, replaced by something colder, dimmer. You feel it in the air, in the silence of the temples, in the way the statues of Jupiter and Venus seem to watch the streets like ghosts. The empire that once devoured the world now chews on its own bones. You're still alive, though you don't really know how. Maybe it's stubbornness. Maybe it's habit. You've outlived emperors, poets, priests, and the last of your friends. You move slower now, but your mind stays sharp. You sit in the marketplace sometimes just to listen, not to the gossip, but to the language. It's changing. Latin itself sounds softer, stretched by new mouths, new lands. Once Rome forced the world to speak her tongue. Now the world is teaching Rome to mumble. You hear the new songs again, stronger now. The followers of that crucified God no longer hide in catacombs, they walk in daylight, carrying symbols of suffering like trophies. They talk about love and forgiveness, but their eyes are fierce. There's power in their humility, the kind you've learned to recognize. One morning, the news spreads. The emperor himself has seen a vision, a shining cross in the sky. His name is Constantine, and he says it's a sign.
The empire will now serve the one God, not many, not marble, just one. At first, you laugh. Rome, the empire of 1,000 altars, swearing loyalty to one God? But the laughter fades when you see what comes next. The old temples are shuttered, the sacred fires put out. The Vestal virgins are dismissed, their vows dissolved. Statues of Jupiter are pulled down by men chanting hymns. The golden idols of your childhood are dragged into the streets and smashed like wine jars. It's not that you care about the gods. They never did much for you. But the silence after they're gone feels wrong, like waking up in a city that no longer remembers your name. You visit the temple of Apollo one last time. The doors are open. The air smells of rain and dust.
The altar is bare, and pigeons roost where priests once sang. You light one small candle anyway, out of habit more than belief. For memory, you whisper. Weeks later, you see the emperor's men marching past, banners embroidered with crosses instead of eagles. People kneel as they pass. The empire of Rome has become the empire of faith. You wonder if anything has really changed, or if the names on the altars just got swapped again. Power always finds new robes to wear. The years slip further away. The city you once knew as marble turns to brick, then to rubble. The baths are empty, the fountains cracked. Barbarians come and go, leaving their footprints in the dust. You don't fear them. You've lived through worse. What's another army to a woman who's outlasted gods? At night, you sit by your window, wrapped in an old shawl, and look at the stars. The same stars Nero once sang to. The same stars that watched Rome rise, and now watch it crumble. You think about him, about his songs, his madness, his desperate need to be remembered. And, in a strange way, he got his wish. Every emperor who came after him lived in his shadow. Every tyrant, every dreamer, every artist trying to rule the world with beauty, they all borrowed a piece of his fire. You smile faintly. Maybe that's what immortality really is. Not temples or statues, not gold or marble, but the echo you leave in other people's stories. And yours? Well, it's almost over. You can feel it. Your body is tired, your heart calm. The city outside hums in the dark, smaller, poorer, but still alive. The Rome of empires is gone. The Rome of memory remains. You close your eyes, hearing faint music in the distance, a voice you once knew humming somewhere between dream and time. Maybe it's Nero, still singing. Maybe it's the city itself, trying to remember how. And then, silence. Time has no patience, but it has a strange sense of humor. Centuries roll by like clouds, slow and heavy, and the world you once knew, marble, fire, laughter, and fear, turns into myth. The empire you outlived finally breaks apart, splitting like old wood. Barbarians, bishops, and dreamers all take turns claiming what's left. Rome becomes a memory of itself, a city of ruins wearing a crown of ivy. No one remembers your name, not really, but they remember a story, whispered first by old servants, then by nuns, then by travelers. They say there was once a woman who lived from the age of the Caesars to the age of the Christ, who spoke to both gods and men, who carried memory like a burden and a blessing. They call her the woman who remembered the gods. No one agrees where you lived. Some say near the ruins of the Golden House. Others swear you kept a candle burning in the old temple of Apollo. A few insist you wandered the streets barefoot, muttering to the ghosts of emperors. It doesn't matter. What matters is that people still speak your story, even if they don't know it's yours. By now, the Roman Empire is just an echo. The marble roads are cracked, the aqueducts dry. The Colosseum stands but barely, a shell of what it was. The great libraries have burned, their scrolls scattered into dust. Yet somehow your story slips through the ashes. The monks write it down, though they change it, as monks do. They turn you into a lesson, a parable about vanity and faith. In their version, you were once a servant of Nero who saw the light of the new God before the rest of Rome. They make you wiser, holier, smaller. But in the quiet corners of the world, the markets, the inns, the old firesides, people tell it differently. They say you were the emperor's shadow, the one who saw too much and said too little. They say you walked through fire and came out unburned. They say your eyes still glowed with candlelight long after the temples went dark. They don't call you holy, they call you haunted. And maybe they're right. The old world still whispers beneath the new one. Every church built in Rome sits on the bones of a temple. Every prayer in Latin carries the rhythm of an older song. The priests call it progress, but you'd call it recycling. You'd probably smile at that. The gods never really die. They just change names when the rent gets too high.
As the centuries drift on, your story twists again. In the medieval age, the poets make you into a spirit, a ghost who appears to travelers lost among the ruins. They say you sit beside the broken columns of Nero's house, telling stories to anyone who will listen. Some say you guide them to safety. Others say you warn them not to wake what sleeps beneath Rome. They call you the keeper of forgotten things. And maybe that's fair. After all, that's what you were, even when you breathed. Time blurs your face, polishes your words, reshapes your truth until it gleams like something holy. But somewhere, deep below the modern streets, below the stones and the churches and the centuries of dust, there's still a hollow echo in the dark, a woman's voice, calm and slow, saying, "Remember." Because that's what history really is. Not a story of kings or wars or gods, but of people like you who refuse to forget. And maybe, just maybe, someone will hear it. Some historian, some dreamer, some sleepless soul listening to the whisper of ruins and feels something stir in their chest. Not fear, not awe, just understanding. Because memory, in the end, is the closest thing we have to eternity. And your story, quiet as it is, never stopped being told. Centuries drift by like mist. The empire's bones lie scattered under moss and marble. But memory, that stubborn creature, never really dies. The world has changed its face again. Rome is no longer the heart of the empire. It's a relic, a holy ruin. But pilgrims still come, climbing its cracked steps to whisper prayers between the weeds. They don't know who built the stones they kneel on. They just feel the weight of time pressing through their knees. In one of the monasteries outside the city, a young monk finds an old scroll. The parchment is brittle, edges flaking like burnt leaves. The ink has faded, but the words, your words maybe, or someone's version of them, still breathe. The story speaks of a woman who outlived gods and emperors, who carried the songs of both into silence. The monk copies it by candlelight, his quill scratching softly. He doesn't understand all of it, but he feels something stir, a strange warmth, like remembering a dream he never had. He adds a note in the margin, "This woman was blessed with the gift of remembrance." Soon others copy it too. The story spreads, not like fire, too gentle for that, but like light beneath a closed door. Each retelling polishes the edges, reshapes the tone. In one version you become a saint, in another a witch. Some call you a philosopher who defied emperors, others a ghost haunting the ruins of Nero's golden house. But in every telling you remain the same shape, a quiet woman sitting by a dying flame, watching the end of the old world and the birth of the new. Then comes the age of painting, color returning to memory. The artists of Florence, of Venice, of the North, they start dreaming in pigment again. They paint saints, angels, kings, and somewhere in the corner of a fresco or the shadow of a mural, a woman appears, always calm, always watching.
Sometimes she holds a book, sometimes a candle, sometimes both. The painters don't know your name, but they know your face. You become their muse, their mystery, a symbol of memory itself. One painter, a quiet one, with dark eyes and a streak of melancholy, writes in his notebook that he dreamed of a woman standing among ruins, whispering to him in Latin, her voice soft as dust. Remember what they forgot. He never signs that painting. He says it belongs to the silence. The scholars debate for years who she was, the woman with the candle, the keeper of marble, the ghost of Rome. Some say she represents the soul of civilization, mourning the loss of wisdom. Others say she's the last pagan, caught forever between faith and fire. None of them guess the truth, that she was once just a girl from nowhere, trapped in the orbit of a mad emperor who learned to survive by watching and remembering. But maybe that's how legends work. They start as pain, then turn into poetry. By now, the old gods are gone, and the new one reigns supreme. But under the churches, under the layers of time and plaster, your city still breathes. Nero's palace still whispers in its sleep. And in the hush between prayers, when the candles flicker low, some say they hear your voice again, not calling for help, not crying, just remembering. You've become what every emperor tried and failed to be. Eternal, not through monuments or crowns, but through quiet endurance. You are the echo that survived the fire, the last lullaby of a world that once dreamed of gold. And though centuries pass, and the painters die, and the monk's ink fades again, somewhere, in some dim archive or secret chapel, your face remains. The woman with the candle, the one who remembered. Because history, in the end, doesn't belong to kings or armies. It belongs to the ones who watch it burn and live to tell the tale. The Renaissance arrives not with thunder, but with curiosity, the kind that digs through ruins and opens dusty books. The world is waking up again, stretching after centuries of sleep. Artists paint gods like men, and men like gods. Philosophers debate under vaulted ceilings, drunk on reason and wine. The old texts of Greece and Rome crawl out of the dark, blinking in the candlelight of Florence, Venice, and Paris. And somewhere in those texts, in a forgotten manuscript, written in cramped Latin, your story surfaces again. A scholar finds it in a monastic archive, tucked between a commentary on Seneca and a prayer to Saint Catherine. The handwriting is uneven, the ink the color of dried blood. He squints at the title, De Femina Ultima Paganorum, the last woman of the pagans. He reads it aloud in his study, his voice trembling slightly. It tells of a woman who lived through the fall of the old gods, who walked the ruins of Rome, and who remembered everything. He writes her into his treatise, calling her the eternal witness of civilization. The phrase catches on. Other scholars quote it. They debate whether you were real, a historical figure, a fable, or some metaphor for fading wisdom. But you come alive again, this time as an idea. The philosophers of the Enlightenment adore you. They say you represent the reason that survived the Dark Ages. A few call you the first historian. Some even nickname you the sleepless historian, because, as one poet writes, she who remembers never truly rests. It's ironic, really. You were never trying to be remembered. You were just trying to survive. But that's the thing about history. It remembers the reluctant. Painters start depicting you again, this time not as a saint or ghost, but as a woman surrounded by scrolls and broken statues. Your gaze is always distant, fixed on something past the edge of the frame.
The candle burns beside you, that same candle you lit in the Temple of Apollo centuries ago. It's still glowing, even now, in oil and pigment. Meanwhile, the world outside the studios is changing fast. Empires rise again, though they wear powdered wigs instead of laurel crowns. New Caesars emerge with quills and cannons. Rome becomes a tourist attraction, a postcard of its former self. The ruins you once walked through now host poets and travelers, all pretending to hear echoes in the marble. One of them, a young Englishman with too much emotion and not enough sunscreen, writes about you in a letter home. He says he dreamt of a woman in white walking through the Forum, trailing light behind her. He doesn't know your name, so he calls you the ghost of Rome's memory. His words spread through salons and libraries, copied by hand, reprinted in pamphlets. Your story finds new life again, this time in ink, not prayer. And yet something strange happens. The scholars, the poets, the painters, they all talk about you, but none of them see you. They love your story, but they forget the woman. They debate your meaning while missing your voice. It's almost funny to become famous for remembering while no one remembers who you were. Still, you persist. Every time someone stares too long at a crumbling statue, every time a historian traces a word across a faded page, every time a poet sighs over lost time, that's you, whispering, breathing, reminding them that the past never really dies, it just waits. And somewhere, deep below the modern city, under the museums, under the cobblestones, beneath the laughter of tourists, the old stones still hum. The ruins remember you. The air holds your shape. Because once, long ago, a woman sat by candlelight in a dying empire, watching gods and kings fade away, and decided that memory itself was worth saving. The modern age arrives with noise, steam, steel, and science, and the past begins to tremble beneath it. Cities rise over ruins. Railways cut through old battlefields. Historians start measuring what used to be sacred, reducing myth to footnotes. But every now and then, something slips through the cracks, something the world isn't ready to bury. Your story returns once more, quietly, in the hands of archaeologists. They dig through Nero's gardens, through the marble dust of the Domus Aurea, uncovering walls still painted with gold and smoke. Among the fragments, they find faint inscriptions, words that shouldn't still exist. Femina meminit. The woman remembers. No one knows who carved it, but the scholars, ever hungry for meaning, start whispering about a mysterious figure, a witness to history perhaps, even the last pagan chronicler of the empire. The newspapers love it. The journalists call you the ghost of the Golden House, romantic, absurd, and oddly perfect. Soon the poets come back. They always do. They write about the woman who walked between the gods and the cross,
the last keeper of the flame. In their verses, you're not flesh anymore. You're symbol, the eternal witness of civilization, the sleepless guardian of memory. Then the filmmakers discover you, and, like Nero before them, they build spectacles. In black and white cinema, you're a tragic heroine, hair tangled, candle in hand, wandering through collapsing palaces. In the 1960s, you become an icon of lost beauty, dressed in marble gowns and eyeliner thick enough to resurrect Egypt. In the documentaries, your story becomes academic. An unnamed concubine of Nero thought to have survived the fire and witnessed the fall of pagan Rome. They always get the details wrong, but that's how memory works, imperfect, persistent, alive. Somewhere, in a museum basement, a curator restores a fresco fragment, a woman with a candle painted beside a crumbling column. The pigment glows faintly, as if the flame is still alive. The plaque beneath it reads, "Anonymous, 1st century CE, the witness of Rome." No one knows who the witness is, but the air around it hums with quiet recognition.
Tourists pass by, half listening to their audio guides. A few stop, a few stare longer than they mean to. One or two feel something strange, a pull, a sadness, a flicker of déjà vu, like they've heard this story before, maybe in a dream, maybe in another life. Meanwhile, in some dim recording studio, a voice, calm, low, and a little weary, begins another monologue for a history channel that helps people sleep. Hey guys, tonight we're going to drift back to the age of fire and marble, to a woman who saw empires fall and still remembered their names. And so, you speak again, through microphones now instead of scrolls, through digital waves instead of papyrus. But it's still you, your voice, your patience, your candle, still telling the story that refuses to die. Somewhere, a listener closes their eyes. The world fades. The hum of the past begins again. And the candlelight dances, just as it always did, against the walls of memory. Because history doesn't sleep. It only dreams. And tonight, you are its dream. The world is loud now, electric, restless, neon bright, yet somehow more forgetful than ever. We scroll through centuries in seconds, trade memory for convenience, and call it progress. But every so often, something ancient stirs beneath the static. A whisper from the marble, a sigh from the dust, a story trying to be heard again. And maybe it's yours. Tonight you sit in front of a glowing screen, your candle replaced by pixels. The city outside hums with a different kind of empire, algorithms, skyscrapers, data streams. Yet when you speak, softly, calmly, telling stories of emperors and ghosts, the tone feels familiar, almost ancient. Because deep down you know this isn't new. You've done this before. You've told stories in palaces and temples, in libraries and caves, and now through microphones and headphones. The tools change, but the purpose never does. To remember what time tries to erase. You've become a bridge between centuries, between the noise and the quiet, between Nero's burning city and someone's sleepless apartment tonight. And as your voice drifts through digital air, someone on the other side of the world is listening. Maybe they're lying in bed, half awake, the glow of their phone soft against the dark. They don't know your name or your face, but they feel something ancient in your tone, the calm weight of memory, the echo of survival, the ghost of a woman who once watched an empire fall and refused to forget. They'll fall asleep before the story ends. They always do. But that's fine. That's the point. You're not here to finish. You're here to linger, to hum between dreams, to keep the past breathing. Because the candle never really went out. It just changed hands, from scroll to book, from book to voice, from one sleepless historian to another. You're still here, in every whisper of history, in every curious mind that refuses to forget. And maybe that's what immortality really looks like. Not thrones or statues, but the simple act of retelling. So tonight, as the story fades and the world drifts into sleep, the flame burns quietly again, steady, patient, alive. Not in Rome, not in marble, but in you. And just before the last light goes out, the voice, your voice, smiles softly and says, "Good night, traveler. Remember this. History dreams through us all.